The Apex Group anniversary gala was held in the 57th floor ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel. The entire wall of floor-to-ceiling windows framed the most expensive night view in the city. I stood in the crowd in an unremarkable dark grey suit, holding a glass of champagne. No one recognized me, and no one cared. That was how Apex Group Capital events always worked. The polished faces stood at center stage, while the one who actually wrote the checks sat in the farthest corner. On stage, Celeste was giving her speech. She wore a burgundy satin gown, the lights catching her collarbone, her whole presence like a carefully curated piece of art. Her voice carried through the sound system with practiced ease, the kind of confidence that only comes from standing at the top for too long. Apex Group would not be where it is today without the trust of every single partner in this room. She raised her glass, her gaze sweeping across the guests before landing on Damien, who was seated at the front table. Her lips curved upward, and I certainly would not be here without my most capable right hand. Damien stood and offered the room a polished nod. He was good-looking, no question. Over 6 feet tall, features sharp enough to have been cut from a magazine cover. 3 years ago, when Celeste brought him into Apex as her personal secretary, there had been murmurs around the office. But the gossip died quickly. Celeste was the public face of Apex, and who she chose to keep close was not up for debate among the rank and file. Took a sip of champagne. It tasted like nothing. The speech ended, and the gala officially began. Celeste stepped off the stage. Damien moved toward her immediately, and she took his arm with the ease of long practice. The two of them worked the room together, glass in hand, weaving through board members and partners with seamless coordination. I watched from a distance, set my glass down and prepared to leave. I should not have come to this event in the first place. 3 years of hidden marriage. The arrangement between Celeste and me had been clear from day one. No public acknowledgement, she played the role of Apex Group CEO, and I remained the invisible capital behind the curtain. Aside from the marriage certificate tucked away in a drawer, there was nothing anyone could point to that linked us together. I had only come tonight because the legal department needed me to sign a few documents. I figured I would show up, sign and slip out. I had almost reached the side exit when Celeste's voice cut through from behind me. Julian. She rarely used my full name. At home, when no one else was around, she called me Jules. In public, she mostly did not speak to me at all. I turned around. Celeste was walking toward me with Damien on her arm, that smile on her face I knew too well. Polished, poised, distant, like looking through a pane of glass. She had been drinking. Her cheeks were flushed, and there was a looseness to her posture that felt deliberate.
"You are still here."
She tilted her head, her tone teasing, as if addressing someone of no particular consequence. Damien stood beside her, his eyes sweeping over me with a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. A few board members and partners nearby turned to look. They clearly did not recognize me and were trying to figure out who I was. Celeste had probably had just enough champagne to feel playful. Or maybe the scale of the evening had gone to her head. She released Damien's arm, took a step forward, rested her hand casually on his chest, and tilted her head toward the board members. What she said was not loud, but it was loud enough for everyone in a 10-foot radius to hear. "Oh, he is just my driver." The air stopped for about 2 seconds. The board members' expressions shifted almost simultaneously. Someone looked away in embarrassment. Someone coughed. Damien lowered his head, the smirk deepening, like he was working hard not to laugh. I stood there, looking into Celeste's eyes. She was looking back at me with something I could not quite name. Little bit of drunkenness, maybe. Little bit of provocation. Or maybe just pure carelessness. She probably figured that no matter what she said, I would swallow it quietly and walk away, the way I had for the past 3 years. After all, in her eyes, Julian was just the guy who kept his head down and never made waves, never showed up at her social events, never mentioned their relationship in public, never even attended her company's annual galas. She probably never once stopped to wonder who exactly had been bankrolling Apex Group's capital base all these years. "The driver," I repeated, and I smiled. Then I stepped forward, adjusted her shawl where it had slipped off her shoulder, and reached past her to push open the ballroom door. Outside, my car was indeed parked at the curb. Black, understated. It did look like a standard corporate sedan. "Get in, Miss Celeste." My voice was calm, calmer than I expected. Celeste blinked, maybe a little thrown that I was playing along so smoothly. She let out a short laugh, took Damien's arm and walked past me. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, crisp and arrogant. As Damien passed me, his stride slowed for half a beat. He turned his head and looked at me. The expression was complicated, smug, mocking, and something else I could not quite place. Like he was looking at a chess piece that had already been checked. I ignored him. Celeste climbed into the car. Damien shut the door for her. I walked around to the driver's side, slid into the seat, and started the engine. I pulled away from the hotel smoothly, merging into traffic. In the rearview mirror, Celeste was leaning her head against Damien's shoulder, eyes closed, that smile still lingering on her lips. Drove her to her own apartment building. She did not invite me up, and I had no intention of going. She got out without saying goodbye, took Damien's arm, and walked straight into the lobby without looking back. Sat in the car, watching her silhouette disappear behind the glass doors. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a number. The call connected on the second ring. Mr. Julian. It was Marcus, the head of my capital team. He was still awake at this hour, which meant he had been waiting for my call. I stared out the window at the glittering nightscape. My voice came out soft, but every word landed like a nail driven into wood. Freeze the $900 million investment in Celestial Holdings. Immediately. There was a 2-second silence on the other end. The entire amount. Every last cent. I paused. Also, set up a conference call with 3 people. Meridian Capital, Graham from Graham and Associates, and Naomi from the offshore acquisitions team. 20 minutes. I will call in when I get home. Marcus had been with me for 12 years. He knew that when I spoke in this tone, the word discussion was not part of the vocabulary. "Understood," he said, and the line went dead. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and pulled onto the main road. In the rearview mirror, the lights of the Whitmore Hotel shrank to a tiny point before vanishing entirely. Celeste wanted face. The price of that face starts tonight. By the time I got home, it was past 1 in the morning. The apartment I kept was on the Upper East Side, a full borough away from Celeste's luxury building. When I had chosen it, she said it was convenient. I said, "Whatever you want." Looking back, it was never about convenience. It was about making sure no one found out there was a marriage certificate with my name on it, tucked in her drawer. I tossed my suit jacket onto the couch, walked into the study, and powered up the 4 screens mounted on the wall. The video feeds from Marcus and the other 3 were already live. Every face on screen looked wide awake. "Mr. Julian, the Celestial Holdings $900 million funding line has been frozen across the board." Marcus started, adjusting his glasses. The banks confirmed it. Ineffective. Immediately. All payments in process under Celestial are suspended. That includes the new project launch funds that were supposed to clear tomorrow. The new project. I thought for a moment. That smart home ecosystem she has been pushing. That is the one. She signed framework agreements with 12 suppliers last month. The first payment, $320 million, is due tomorrow by 5 p.m. Marcus paused. "The money is now gone." I nodded, pulled a cigarette from the drawer and lit it. The other 3 faces on screen were Graham from Graham and Associates, Naomi, who ran my offshore acquisition team, and a senior partner from Meridian Capital. Each of them had been with me for years. Naomi was the newest, and she had been on my payroll for 7. "Graham, are the distribution channel acquisition packages ready?" Graham flipped open a folder on his end of the screen. Celestial has 470 Tier 1 distributors nationwide. The core 230 are concentrated on the East Coast and in the Southeast. I have already begun reaching out to their regional agents through 3 shell companies. Our wholesale price offer comes in at 15% below Celestial's current rates. 15%. The Meridian partner frowned. That is not going to get it done. These distributors have long-term contracts with Celestial. Under normal circumstances, it would not, Graham said, glancing in my direction. But if Celestial cannot pay its suppliers by tomorrow, and the supply chain freezes, those distributors will be holding empty contracts. At that point, 15% will look generous. We could push it to 20, and they would still sign. The Meridian partner said nothing. Inai tapped ash into the tray. Naomi, where are we on the offshore side? Naomi's feed showed daylight behind her. She was in the Singapore office. She flipped her tablet around to face the camera, displaying a layered equity structure chart. I have mapped out Celestial's 3-tier holding structure in the Caymans. Their largest institutional shareholder offshore is Drayton Global Partners, holding 16.8%. Drayton's Asia-Pacific head knows me well. Inai spoke with him on the phone an hour ago. She paused. He said that if someone offered 10% above market, they might consider reducing their position. Do not offer 10% above market, I said. Tell him to wait 3 days before he answers. 3 days from now, Celestial's share price will look different. Naomi smiled and pulled her tablet back. Understood. The study fell quiet for a few seconds. All 3 faces on screen were looking at me, waiting for the final word. Inai crushed the cigarette into the tray. 3 things moving simultaneously, I said. 1. Graham continues acquiring distributor contracts. In move fast. In sign everything you can. What you cannot sign, lock down with letters of intent. 2. By noon tomorrow, I want a complete list of Celestial's suppliers ranked. Highlight the 5 most critical to her new project. I want to see their supply contract terms. 3. Naomi, you fly back the day after tomorrow. Bring me the completed framework for acquiring Drayton's 16.8% stake. I want the full proposal on my desk by the end of the week. Got it. All 3 answered almost in unison. The video feeds cut to black, leaving only the desktop on my screens. Inai sat alone in the study for a long time. Outside the window, the city sprawled quiet and still, like a dead body of water. Inai picked up my phone and scrolled. Celeste had just posted a new update on her social media. In photos from tonight's gala, in a grid of 9 shots, her on stage raising a glass, her and Damien smiling side by side, her surrounded by a cluster of board members. The caption was 2 words, "In so grateful." Inai checked the time. 1:30 in the morning. Barely an hour and a half since I had closed her car door. Her face was certainly worth something. $900 million, apparently. My phone rang. In Celeste, Inai stared at her name on the screen for about 10 seconds and did not answer. It rang 6 times before cutting off. 30 seconds later, it rang again. This time it went for 11 rings before she hung up. She did not call a 3rd time. Inai knew exactly why she was calling. Her CFO would have already called her in a panic about the 900 million freeze. She was probably still half drunk and half asleep, and her first instinct was not to come up with a countermove. Her first instinct was to ask me if I knew anything about it, because in her mind I was just her driver. Inai got up, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. The city lights stretched to the horizon, dense and glittering, like an enormous chessboard where every piece glowed in its assigned square. Celeste had probably never stopped to consider that every piece on that board, every single one she could see, belonged to me. By noon the next day, Graham's email arrived. He had flagged all 5 of Celestial's most critical suppliers. 3 were mid-sized manufacturers in the Midwest, and 2 were component fabricators based in the industrial belt outside Chicago. Together, they accounted for 70% of the raw materials feeding her new project. At the bottom of the email, there was a single added line. Reliable source reports Celestial's CFO made 12 calls to the banks this morning. Every one of them was routed to voicemail. Inai typed back 4 words, "Keep me updated." By 6 in the evening, Marcus checked in. He had locked down 60 of Celestial's core East Coast distributors in a single day. All of them had signed exclusive channel agreements with the new entities Meridian Capital controlled. Starting tomorrow, those distributors would slash their Celestial orders by more than half and pivot to sourcing through the new channel. Celeste's new project had not even officially launched yet, and a major chunk of her distribution network had already been carved out from under her. And she still did not know. At 8 that night, Celeste called again. This time, I answered, Julian. Her voice was stretched tight, none of her usual ease. Have you gotten any strange calls today? What kind of calls? I asked. The banks. There is some kind of... Never mind. You probably would not know anyway. She took a sharp breath, and just like that, her voice snapped back to its habitual coldness. Nothing. Inai dialed the wrong number. The line went dead. Inai stood there with the phone in my hand, the corner of my mouth curving up before I could stop it. Dialed the wrong number. Even now, she would rather call a driver by accident than ask one real question. In somewhere deep down, she must have sensed something, but her pride would not let her say it out loud. It would not let her admit that the man she had dismissed in public as her driver might have something to do with the ground crumbling beneath her feet. My phone buzzed again. Not Celeste this time. Marcus, Mr. Julian, latest update. There was a current of suppressed satisfaction in his voice. Miss Celeste just convened an emergency meeting with her core team. They are discussing short-term bridge loans, private lending channels. She needs $200 million to cover payments coming due next week. What is the interest rate on the table? 25%. Annualized. 25%. In Celeste, when you were standing there with a glass in your hand, telling everyone I was your driver, I doubt you imagined you would be out begging for loans at 25% interest less than 24 hours later. Let her borrow, I said. Whatever she borrows, I will make sure she loses twice that. I hung up and opened an encrypted folder on my computer. Inside was the first draft of the Drayton Global Partners equity acquisition proposal Naomi had sent. Innie scrolled to the last line and read her projected timeline. If Drayton's 16.8% was consolidated with the retail shares we were picking up on the open market, combined with the distribution channels Graham was securing, Celestial Holdings would lose controlling interest within 3 months. 3 months? Innie closed the laptop and turned toward the window. In Celeste, you think face is something other people give you. In-face is something you earn, and if you cannot earn it, you do not get to complain when someone takes it apart piece by piece. Tomorrow at your celebration party, I have a gift for you. In Celeste chose the same venue for her celebration party. The 57th floor ballroom at the Whitmore, the exact room where she had held the anniversary gala 3 days earlier. She probably figured winning twice in a row on the same stage would make the victory look effortless. Innie stood at the window of a coffee shop across the street, watching the elevator floor numbers climb inside the tower opposite. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. The package has been delivered, Mr. Julian. Innie typed back 2 words, "In wait for me." The celebration was not small. Celeste had booked the entire floor. Over 100 guests, partners, press, in a handful of industry association people, most of Apex Group's senior management. She stood on stage in a black one-shoulder gown, smiling like her cheeks might crack, while the LED screen behind her blazed with the headline, Celestial Holdings Smart Home Ecosystem Series B financing successfully closed. When I pushed open the ballroom door, her speech was reaching its crescendo. Everyone here tonight has witnessed the rise of Apex over the past 3 years. Celeste raised her glass, her voice ringing bright and clear. Today is not just a financing milestone, it marks Apex's transformation from traditional real estate into a technology-driven industry leader. She saw me. Across dozens of tables, her eyes landed on me for maybe half a second, then slid away. The curve of her smile did not waver. Damien, standing slightly behind her to the side, narrowed his eyes just a fraction. Inai took a seat in the back row. The man beside me was a project manager from Apex, early 30s, probably new enough not to recognize my face. He clinked glasses with me enthusiastically. Inai returned the gesture. In on the floor. Celeste finished her speech to a roomful of applause. She descended from the stage. Damien met her at the bottom step, and she took his arm with the same seamless choreography as 3 nights before. They moved through the crowd, toasting and laughing, a perfect portrait of poise and charm. The 900 million freeze, The 25% bridge loans. She mentioned none of it, not a word. This woman was, if nothing else, extraordinarily gifted at pretending nothing was wrong. About 40 minutes into the dinner, the doors opened. 3 people walked in. The man in front was someone I knew intimately. Adrian, head of Apex Group's legal department. He was 45, wore gold-rimmed glasses, and I had personally poached him from one of the top white-shoe law firms in the country 7 years ago. He had handled over 100 commercial disputes for Apex and had never lost a single one. 2 junior attorneys followed behind him, each carrying a leather document satchel. Adrian's gaze swept the room as he entered. He spotted me in the back row. Ine did not move, did not give him any signal. He pulled his eyes away and walked directly toward the main table. The noise in the room died down in layers. First, the tables near the door went quiet. Then the silence spread outward like a ripple. Celeste was mid-sentence with a journalist, wine glass in hand. She sensed the shift in the room and turned, and Adrian was already standing in front of her. Miss Celeste. His voice was low but perfectly clear. Apologies for the interruption. Celeste frowned. Adrian, this is a celebration. Whatever it is can wait until tomorrow. I am afraid it cannot. Adrian reached back and took the first document from the junior attorney behind him. He unsealed the envelope, pulled out a formal letter, and placed it on the table in front of Celeste. This is the official notice from Apex Group's capital partners regarding the full withdrawal of the $900 million investment facility. It requires your immediate signature of receipt. The entire ballroom went silent, the kind of silence where 100 people stop breathing at the same time, as if someone had turned the volume dial all the way to 0. Celeste's face changed, not all at once. It was a slow unraveling layer by layer. Shock, disbelief, then something harder and colder, a kind of iron grey. Adrian, are you joking? Her voice was pressed down tight, each word squeezed through clenched teeth. I am not joking. Adrian did not blink. He pulled a second set of documents from the other satchel. Here are copies of 3 distributor channel acquisition agreements. As of this morning, Meridian Capital has formally taken over 63 of your core East Coast distributors. Celeste's hand pressed flat against the table. Her knuckles were white. Beside her, Damien finally spoke. Adrian, this is an internal company event. If you have legal documents to serve, follow standard procedure. There is a third matter. Adrian did not look at him. He extracted a final document from the third satchel. This is a formal legal inquiry, filed by the capital partners, regarding Miss Celeste's unauthorized use of high-interest private lending facilities, an annualized rate of 25%, an amount of $200 million, sourced from an unregistered private lender. Under the company's bylaws, this transaction requires board approval. As of now, the board has received no written application. The words landed, and even the board members at the neighboring tables rose to their feet. Every trace of expression drained from Celeste's face. The blankness was not composure. It was the look of someone stripped naked in a public square, too stunned to know what face to put on. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes moved past the guests, past the board members, past everyone between us until they landed on the back row. She was looking at me. I stayed in my seat. I had a half-finished glass of champagne in my hand. Innie met her gaze and let the corner of my mouth lift just slightly. In her eyes there was shock. In there was fury. In there was incomprehension. And there was something else, something I had never seen from her before. Fear. She was finally starting to be afraid. She was finally starting to understand that the man she had dismissed as her driver might have something to do with everything that was happening to her. But I was not finished. Just as she stared at me, her phone buzzed on the table. Not a ringtone. Message alerts. 3 in a row from the same sender. She glanced down on reflex. On the screen was a photograph. The image was sharp, clearly taken from outside a hotel window. 2 people half undressed on a bed, a sheet pulled only to their waists. The man was Damien, his magazine cover face unmistakable. The woman was curled against his shoulder, laughing, her features warm under amber light. Vivienne, Vincent's daughter, my sworn enemy's daughter, with Damien. In her bed, Celeste's hands began to shake. The tremors started at her fingertips, like an electric current had been switched on, then spread rapidly through her whole hand and up her arm. Her fingers curled around the phone, knuckles sharp and bloodless, the glow of the screen illuminating a face gone utterly pale. "Miss Celeste?" Adrian was still standing in front of her, his voice professionally neutral. "Can you confirm receipt of the documents?" Celeste did not answer. She was still staring at the photograph. Damien, sensing something, stepped forward as if to look at her screen. Celeste jerked her head up and stared at him. Her lips parted. No words came out. Her eyes reddened, but no tears fell. She was probably not capable of letting herself cry in front of this many people. 100 pairs of eyes watched her. 3 minutes ago, she had been on stage toasting a successful financing round, the undisputed queen of the room. And now, in front of her lay a withdrawal notice, distributor acquisition agreements, and a formal legal inquiry. And on her phone sat a photograph of her most trusted secretary and her worst enemy's daughter tangled in hotel sheets. Celeste turned her phone face down on the table. Her voice scraped out, hoarse and raw. "Adrian, I have received the documents. Please leave." Adrian inclined his head slightly and turned toward the door, the 2 junior attorneys falling in behind him. The ballroom doors swung shut. Celeste braced her hands on the edge of the table for 3 seconds. Then she lifted her head slowly and looked toward the back row one more time. My seat was empty. I was already out the front door of the Whitmore when the night wind hit me, cold with the bite of late autumn. My phone rang. Celeste. I answered and said nothing. The line stayed silent for a long moment, long enough that I thought she had hung up. Then her voice came through, in no anger, in no accusation, just a tone so flat it sounded almost calm. "Julian, who exactly are you?" I looked across the street at the Apex Tower, its lights blazing against the skyline, and I smiled. "Your driver," I said, and hung up. Behind me, the revolving doors of the Whitmore kept spinning, silent and smooth, the glass reflecting the neon blur of the city. Celeste stood somewhere behind the penthouse windows, probably watching my taillights disappear into the traffic. Her nightmare had only just begun. I went back to Apex Tower the next afternoon, not for Celeste. After the disaster at her celebration party, the company had been in chaos all day. The stock had dropped 6% at the opening bell and was down 11 points by noon. Several of the old board members had called me repeatedly. Did not pick up. Marcus reported that Celeste had not come into the office at all. Her door had been locked all day. I came to retrieve a few documents from my private safe. The parking garage elevator took me straight to the executive floor. The hallway was nearly empty. Without Celeste present, the whole upper management layer had slackened. Swiped my card, entered the office, and pulled a sealed envelope from the hidden compartment behind the wall panel. When I turned to leave, Damien was standing in the corridor. He leaned against the wall, hands in his trouser pockets, white shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. He was looking at me without the usual deferential half-smile and without the panic he should have worn after being exposed the night before. His expression was level and still as a polished mirror. "Mr. Julian," he said. His voice was light. "A word?" I tucked the envelope under my arm. "About what?" "You are not curious why I spent 3 years inside Apex?" "Not particularly." I pressed the elevator button. The car was climbing from the lobby, the numbers ticking upward one by one. Damien did not leave. He took a couple of steps closer, his leather soles clicking on the marble floor, each step deliberate. "You are not curious, but I'm going to tell you anyway." He stopped about 3 paces behind me. "Because I have been waiting for this day for 3 years. The elevator arrived. The doors opened to an empty car. Damien stepped in first. I watched him for 2 seconds, then followed. The doors closed and the elevator began its descent. "That photo you sent last night, it was well shot." Damien's tone was conversational, as if he were evaluating a cup of coffee. "But you probably do not know that Vivienne and I have been together for almost 2 years. I said nothing. When I joined Apex 3 years ago, the first thing I did was find a way to get close to Celeste. He kept talking, his voice steady as if recounting a story that had nothing to do with him. She is smart. She is proud. But she has one fatal weakness. She needs to be adored. You married her, but you never gave her that in public. So there was always a vacancy beside her for someone who would praise her openly and make her feel seen. And you filled it, I said.
Exactly.
Within 6 months, she trusted me completely. She never showed me your marriage certificate, but I saw your separation agreement. 3 years of hidden marriage. You two live in the same city but lead separate lives. You barely see each other, unless it is by accident. Damien let out a short laugh. Honestly, I have no real interest in her. But she held the keys to Apex. The floor number hit 15. So Vincent sent you, I said. Damien turned his head to look at me. In there was an odd glint in his eyes. Not just that, he said. Vincent sent me because I had my own reason to come. The elevator stopped at the lobby. The doors opened onto a busy atrium full of people crossing the marble floor. Damien reached out and pressed the door close button. The doors slid shut again. He pressed the parking garage level. Julian, your father was Dominic. Am I right? I looked at him. Dominic, co-founder of Apex Group. Back in the 90s, he and Vincent built Apex Real Estate from the ground up. Then they fell out over the equity split and ended up in court. Your father won. Vincent was forced out with nothing but debt. It took him 15 years to rebuild from scratch. That is public business history, I said. Any financial journalist could have written it. Then you also know why Vincent lost that equity lawsuit. Damien turned to face me. His expression shifted, the composure cracking just slightly. Because 3 days before the court date, his wife drank a bottle of pesticide at home. He never even got to say goodbye. The elevator doors opened into the parking garage. Dim fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Damien stepped out. Inai followed. Why did his wife kill herself? Damien looked back at me. His mouth curved, but there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. Because your father, Dominic, showed up at her workplace a week before she died. He stood in front of everyone she knew and called her a thief. In said she had embezzled company money. In said she would spend the rest of her life in prison. His voice echoed through the underground concrete. She checked the books and discovered $80,000 was missing. She never took that money. But every signature on the paperwork was hers. Your father used that to threaten her. Told her she had to testify that Vincent had stolen company assets. She was too scared to tell Vincent and too terrified of going to prison. And so she chose a bottle of pesticide. I stayed silent. Damien was 3 years old that year. His mother had named him. She had not even registered his birth yet. He paused. Later, Vincent used his private channels to trace where that money had gone. The $80,000. Dominic had moved it himself, using a backup company's seal that had been decommissioned. He orchestrated the whole thing just to force her into giving false testimony. So you carry her name, I said. I carry my mother's name. His voice finally began to tremble, but he was fighting to control it. After the pesticide, Vincent took me in and raised me. Ine, do not use his name because I cannot use his name, and I sure as hell cannot use yours. The garage was silent for a few seconds. In the distance, a car rolled past, tires humming over concrete like a low growl of thunder. Julian. Damien stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the red lines webbing the whites of his eyes. I spent 3 years inside Apex not for trade secrets. I spent them so I could watch you go bankrupt with my own eyes. So I could take everything your father did to my mother and dump it right on his son. Your father, where is he now? He asked, and then answered himself. In a cemetery outside the city. He died 8 years ago. When he died, you were the one who took on all of Apex's debt and every mess he left behind. I never got the chance to find him. But I found you. His eyes were wet, but nothing fell. A son paying his father's debts, I said. No, Damien stared at me. You took over his table. That means you inherited his debts. That is just how it works. He stepped back, smoothed the front of his shirt, and tucked away the tremor that had surfaced. Just like that, he was polished again, the picture of effortless composure. All right, I have said my piece. He pressed his key fob. A white coupe blinked its lights further down the garage. You can keep going after Celestial. You can go after Vincent if you want. But let me remind you of one thing. The financial holes in Apex right now were dug by me and Celeste over 2 years. Even if you froze the 900 million, that hole is not something you can fill. He opened his car door and looked back at me. Your little driver game is over. The door slammed, the engine turned over, and the white coupe rolled out of the garage exit into the afternoon light. I stood alone in the underground parking garage, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The envelope in my hand was creased where my fingers had tightened around it. Inside was the complete original equity structure of Apex Group from 3 decades ago. The one document my father and his enemies had spent a lifetime trying to bury and had never managed to destroy. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus. I need you to look into someone. Damien. Original name unknown. Entered Apex 3 years ago. Pull his birth records, household registrations, school records, everything you can find from start to finish. Not a single detail gets missed. Marcus paused on the other end. Mr. Julian, is there a problem with this man? He is my brother. I hung up, walked to my car and got in. Did not start the engine right away. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment. Outside the window, Apex Tower rose against the sky. My father and Vincent had built that building together. Then my father had taken all of it and shoved Vincent out of the boardroom, out of the company, out of everything he had once owned. The man everyone in that office had once called Mr. Dominic was my father. The woman who drank pesticide alone in her own home was Damien's mother. And Damien was my half-brother. He had spent 3 years infiltrating my company, seducing my hidden wife, signing a bet-on-failure agreement inside her encrypted cloud drive. The goal was to hollow out the entire group and leave me holding every criminal charge and every dollar of debt. That was what he had wanted all along, not money. Debt. Started the engine and pulled out of the garage fast, tires squealing against the concrete. Needed to read that agreement between Celeste and Damien one more time, sooner than I had planned. Did not go home after the parking garage. Drove straight to Marcus's safe house. The safe house occupied an entire floor of an unmarked office building in Hudson Yards. No company name on the door. The elevator required a separate fingerprint scan. When I walked in, it was past 1 in the morning. Marcus and Naomi sat in front of a bank of monitors, 8 printed bank statements spread across the desk between them. How far along is the cloud drive decryption? I tossed my jacket over the back of a chair. Naomi did not look up. 97%. Miss Celeste used commercial-grade encryption with a fairly long key, but I found a hash of her passphrase in a backup file from the last time she had her phone repaired. The brute force has been running for about 4 hours. How much longer? Now, as she said it, a green progress bar filled the screen. 100%. Naomi clicked into the unlocked folder. Inside were hundreds of documents, densely packed, dated and numbered, stretching from 3 years ago to today without a single gap. Pulled up a chair and sat in front of the screen. The top file was labeled Project Restructuring Proposal. I opened it, and the first page made my pupils contract. It was not a business plan. It was a complete asset transfer roadmap. 12 core Apex Group projects were scheduled to be transferred in phases over 3 years to 4 offshore shell companies. The shells were registered in the Caymans, the British Virgin Islands, Bermuda, and Hong Kong. The field for ultimate beneficial owner had 2 names filled in. In Celeste, Damien, every shell company's equity structure was diagrammed with precision. In Celeste held 51%, Damien held 49%. Once the transfers were complete, Apex Group's net assets would be gutted by over 70%. What remained would be an empty shell. Scroll down, I said. Naomi opened the second file. It was a scanned copy of a performance-based agreement dated 2 years ago. Party A was Celeste. Party B was Damien. The agreement had 2 core clauses. Clause 1. In Party B will assist Party A in completing the offshore transfer of Apex Group's core assets within 3 years. Upon completion, Party A will assume all historical liabilities of Apex Group in her capacity as legal representative. Clause 2. Should the plan fail or be exposed prematurely, Party B reserves the right to seize full control of all offshore assets held by Party A as compensation for breach of contract. My eyes stopped on the words legal representative. Who was the legal representative of Apex Group? I was. 3 years ago, after Celeste and I signed the marriage certificate, the very first thing she asked me to do was transfer the legal representative designation from her name to mine. She said she was already too visible as the public-facing CEO. The legal rep role came with full liability. "You take it," she had said. The way she said it was softer than her usual tone, almost gentle. I had looked into her eyes and signed without a second thought. Looking back now, that was not gentleness. That was move 1. I kept scrolling. The third section of the file was a debt schedule. Apex Group's current liabilities, in-bank loans, trust financing, trade payables to suppliers. Total together, the figure was $13.7 billion. Under the path Celeste and Damien had mapped out, once the core assets were stripped away, every dollar of that debt would stay behind in Apex's hollowed shell, and the legal representative would bear unlimited joint liability. $13.7 billion. Enough to put me in prison for several lifetimes. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked to the window. The city at 2 in the morning was silent as an empty cathedral, streetlights stretching long shadows across the pavement. 3 years of hidden marriage, 3 years of living apart, 3 years of watching her parade around on Damien's arm in public, laughing and radiant, while at home she could barely spare me a glance. I had always chalked it up to her pride. She did not want to admit she had married an invisible man. That was never it. From the day she married me, she had been playing for this endgame. Mr. Julian. Naomi's voice came from behind me. There is one more encrypted file at the bottom of this directory. It just finished decrypting. Open it. An audio file popped onto the screen. Naomi clicked play, and Celeste's voice spilled out of the speakers. The quality was slightly tinny, like it had been recorded in a large empty room, but every word was clear. Damien, the liability clause on the legal rep. Are you absolutely sure there are no loopholes? Then Damien's voice. 100%. Under corporate law, the legal representative is jointly and severally liable for all company debts. As long as you strip the assets clean, Julian is the one who catches every single charge. And if he figures it out early, he will not. He has never once checked your books. That man has a kind of, I do not know, an almost stupid level of trust in you. There was a 2-second pause in the recording. Then Celeste laughed. It was a light laugh, very short. "That is pretty stupid," she said. Naomi hit pause and turned to look at me. Marcus stood frozen by the desk, his face locked in an expression I could not read. I said nothing. Inni stood at the window, staring out at the darkest hour of the city's night, and the only thing looping in my head was Celeste's voice saying those 3 words. That is pretty stupid. She was not wrong. I had been pretty stupid. Stupid enough not to check her books for 3 years. Stupid enough to sign over the legal rep position without blinking. Stupid enough that when she called me her driver in front of the entire executive team, I was still making excuses for her in my head, telling myself she had just had too much to drink. She had not been drunk. She had been perfectly clear-headed. From beginning to end, the sole function of this marriage was to tie a noose around my neck and wait for the right moment to pull it tight. Inni turned away from the window and walked back to the desk. Inni picked up my phone. "Marcus, where is the 900 million right now? Offshore protected accounts, all under your personal name." "Good." I scrolled through my contacts until I found Naomi's number. "Naomi, fly to Singapore first thing in the morning. Get the Drayton 16.8% acquisition agreement signed. Then call Graham. I want him to finalize the framework for a tender offer of at least 30% of Celestial Holdings within the week." Naomi blinked. "Mr. Julian, a tender offer requires public disclosure of the funding source, and it has to go through SEC review. Then disclose it. The funding source is my 900 million. push the review through on an expedited basis. And I will pay triple the processing fees. I tossed the phone onto the desk and stared at the screen. She wants to hollow out Apex? Then, before she makes her move, I will take controlling interest in Celestial. And one more thing. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the wax-sealed envelope. I broke the seal and slid out a sheaf of yellowed papers. These are the photocopies of my father's original equity agreements. Vincent's signature is on them. Marcus, I need you to do something. Marcus took the papers and flipped through them. His face shifted. This is the original equity transfer agreement Vincent signed when he and my father split. There is a clause in it that both sides overlooked. If Party B, that is Vincent, engages in malicious competition or acts that harm Apex's interests in any subsequent business dealings, the transferred equity can be reclaimed at the original price. This clause was struck from the arbitration documents later, but the original version still exists. Damien says Vincent is my father's sworn enemy. Wrong. Vincent's weak spot has always been in my hand. The study went quiet for a solid 10 seconds. Marcus exhaled slowly. Mr. Julian, how do you want to use this? Not yet, I said, sliding the papers back into the envelope. Let Damien play out his hand first. I will flip this card when the time is right. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to pale. The city was waking up. Apex's crisis, Celestial's counterattack, Damien's revenge, Vincent's circling, all of it was a net drawing tighter. But the person weaving the net had changed tonight. In Celeste, you called me stupid. Now let me show you what a man who has been your driver for 3 years looks like when he actually gets behind the wheel. 3 days later, the emergency shareholder meeting of Celestial Holdings convened on the 36th floor of One World Trade Center. Over 40 people sat around the table. 9 board members, representatives from more than a dozen institutional shareholders, 3 elders from Celeste's family. At the center of the table sat Celeste's father, Arthur. He was in his early 70s, white-haired but sharp, wearing a dark blue tailored suit, his back ramrod straight. Celeste sat to his left in a white power suit, makeup flawless, her face betraying no cracks. But I noticed her fingers. She had a pen in her hand, a Mont Blanc, spinning it over and over through her fingers. It had not stopped since I walked in. Damien was not present. After his confession in the parking garage 3 days ago, he had resigned from Apex and vanished. My people were still tracking him. Arthur tapped the microphone in front of him, his voice carrying through the room with practiced authority. Ladies and gentlemen shareholders, I called this emergency meeting today because the company faces certain unfriendly maneuvers from external capital. We need to align on a response. He had barely finished speaking when the doors opened. Adrian walked in, 2 attorneys behind him, the same choreography as the celebration party 3 days before, but this time the document in his hand was not a withdrawal notice. I followed Adrian inside. I wore a dark blue bespoke suit. The cufflinks, a pair of old pieces my mother had left me. 40 pairs of eyes in the room turned toward me at once. A few recognized me and sucked in a sharp breath. Celeste's pen stopped spinning. Arthur frowned. Who are you? This is a Celestial Holdings shareholder meeting. It is not open to the public. Adrian stepped up to the conference table and placed a document on its surface. His voice was steady and clear. Under Article 37 of the company's charter, any shareholder holding more than 5% of the company's shares has the right to propose an emergency meeting and to speak at that meeting. Mr. Julian, through a wholly owned offshore entity under his control, now holds 13.2% of Celestial Holdings. The room detonated. 13.2%. That made me the largest external shareholder of Celestial outside the founding family. Celeste shot to her feet. That is impossible. How could you possibly have shares in my... From 3 years ago, right around the time you started talking to me about marriage. I looked at her, my voice even. You never asked where my money came from. You never asked how much I actually had. You assumed the mystery capital behind Apex was some old associate of your father's. You never once thought it might be me. Celeste's face drained of color. Arthur slammed his hand on the table. I do not care who you are. Even if you hold 13%, you do not have the authority. 13% was yesterday's number. I took a second document from Adrian's hand and slid it across the table to Arthur. This is the tender offer my entities completed this morning through Graham and Associates and Meridian Capital. As of this week, I control a combined 31.5% of Celestial Holdings equity. Miss Arthur, the seat you are sitting in no longer belongs to you by any measure of shareholding. Arthur stared down at the document. The color drained from his face in layers, until all that remained was a grey, sickly pallor. And one more thing. My voice stayed even, unhurried. I have instructed Adrian to submit a full evidentiary package to the authorities this morning. It covers Miss Celeste and Mr. Damien's activities over the past 2 years. Illegal asset transfers, using their positions as senior Apex executives, embezzlement, suspected money laundering, the complete evidence chain. That includes incorporation records, bank statements, and the original signed agreement between the two of them, tied to 4 shell companies in the Caymans, the British Virgin Islands, Bermuda, and Hong Kong. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket and set it on the table. The audio file on this drive contains the full recording of Celeste and Damien discussing how to transfer assets offshore and leave me holding all the legal liability. The authorities are already running voice print analysis. The room went completely silent. Everyone was staring at Celeste. She stood there, one hand braced on the table, the other still clutching that Mont Blanc, knuckles white. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but nothing came out. Arthur suddenly lurched to his feet, his face flushed a deep, violent red. He pointed a shaking finger at Celeste. "You, what have you done behind my—" He never finished the sentence. His body seized, his mouth opened and closed, his right hand clutched at his chest, and then his whole frame went rigid, as if something inside him had snapped. He toppled straight backward. The chair clattered to the floor with a deafening crash. "Dad!" Celeste screamed. The room exploded into chaos. Someone called for an ambulance. Someone rushed to the door shouting for the building's medical office. Arthur lay on the floor, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, cold sweat covering his forehead. I stepped back through the chaos. Adrian moved to my side. "The authorities confirmed the filing has been formally accepted," he said quietly. "Let us go." I turned, pushed open the conference room doors and walked out without looking back. The hallway lights were blindingly bright. In behind me, the noise inside the room faded. Celeste's voice calling for her father growing hoarser with each cry, a sound like an animal cornered with nowhere left to run. I pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. I stepped inside. The car began its descent. The numbers ticked down from 36, one floor at a time. My phone rang. "Marcus, Mr. Julian Damien has been located. He entered Vincent's private townhouse in Sutton Place this afternoon. He has not come out. Keep eyes on him." I hung up and looked at my reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall. The man who had stood in a government office 3 years ago with sweaty palms, the man who smiled and held the car door while his wife called him her driver, that man was gone. Someone else was standing here now. Celeste had thought the endgame of this marriage was me buried under 13.7 billion in debt. But she forgot one thing. She never really knew the man she married. The elevator reached the ground floor. Crossed the lobby and pushed through the glass doors. The sun outside was harsh and bright. Pedestrians moved along the sidewalk, no one knowing what had just happened 36 floors above them. Took out my phone and dialed a number. "Mr. Vincent, this is Julian, Dominic's son." The line went silent for a long time, long enough that I could hear the other man breathing. "I figured you would call eventually." Vincent's voice was gravelly and low, carrying a peculiar calm that came only from decades of weathering storms. "Your son spent 3 years inside my company as a mole. He conspired with your daughter to stage photographs. He signed a bet-on-failure agreement with my hidden wife, designed to send me to prison. Vincent, I think it is time we settled accounts face to face." Vincent was quiet for a longer stretch. Then he laughed. The sound carried no malice, just an exhaustion I could not quite name. "Come on then, kid. Will be waiting at the old place." The line went dead. I pocketed the phone, and looked up at the sky. The skyline of this city was carved into narrow canyons by 1,000 towers, sunlight leaking through the gaps and landing on my face. Inai flagged a cab and pulled open the door. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Sutton Place, Vincent's private residence." The cab merged into traffic. Inai leaned back and closed my eyes. An image flickered through my mind. 3 years ago on our wedding day. Celeste in a white dress standing in front of me, the officiant asking if she took this man. She had said "I do," and there had been something in her eyes. Inner light. But what kind of light had it been? Genuine feeling, or the first move of a 3-year chess game? Innie did not know, and at this point the answer did not matter. What mattered was that the game she started was now being played by my rules. Vincent's private residence sat in a row of old townhouses in Sutton Place, and there was no plaque by the door, just 2 sycamores planted nearly a century ago, their branches spreading wide over the stoop. The cab pulled up, and a man in a black suit was already waiting on the steps, as if he had known exactly when I would arrive. "Mr. Julian, Mr. Vincent is waiting in the study." I walked down a hallway lined with old photographs. The 90s, the founding ceremony of Apex Real Estate. My father and Vincent standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a red banner, both in their early 30s, laughing without any trace of guardedness. Further down, even older photos, the 2 of them in matching work jackets on a construction site, a stretch of freshly leveled earth behind them. The study was at the end of the hall. The door was open. Vincent sat in an old wooden chair, a pot of tea already brewed on the side table, 2 cups waiting. He looked older than I had imagined. His hair was completely white, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were still sharp. 2 stones polished by too many years. He did not stand when he saw me. He only lifted a hand and gestured toward the empty chair. "You look like your mother," Vincent said. His voice was rough but steady. "The eyes are not your father's. Your father's eyes always had calculation running behind them. In yours do not." I sat down across from him. "I did not come here to reminisce. I know." He lifted his cup and took a sip.
"You came to ask about Damien."
The study was quiet for a moment. Outside, the shadows of the sycamore branches moved across the floor, stirred by the wind. "Your son infiltrated my company for 3 years. He signed a bet-on-failure agreement with my hidden wife. He tried to bury me under $13.7 billion of debt. Your daughter staged bedroom photographs with him and sent them to my wife's phone." I held his gaze. "Vincent, what do you think I should do?" Vincent set his teacup down and leaned back in his chair. He looked at me for a long time. So long I thought he was not going to answer. Then he said something that froze me in my seat. "Damien does not carry his mother's name." "What?" "His name is not just hers. He is a direct blood descendant of your father. He is your half-brother, Julian." The air in the study felt like it had been sucked out. The sycamore shadows still moved across the floor, but everything else seemed to stop. "Your father had a woman outside his marriage," Vincent said, his voice flat, like he was narrating something that had nothing to do with him. "Her name was Elaine. She worked in finance at Apex. Your father was with her for 3 years. She bore him a son. Your mother never knew. No one in the company knew. No one except me." My fingers pressed into the armrests of the chair, knuckles going pale. "Why did your father go after Elaine?" "It was not about money. It was because she told him she was taking the child and leaving for good. Your father was terrified she would expose everything. It would have destroyed his reputation. It would have destroyed Apex. So he manufactured that $80,000 paper trail and tried to force her into making false statements." Vincent looked at me. "After Elaine died, I tracked the child down. He had been placed with a distant relative in a rented room on the outskirts of the city. 3 years old. Not even registered for school. Innie took him in. Innie let him carry his mother's name." "That is not right," I said. "He told me his name was his mother's because she was the only parent who mattered. His mother did give him that name, but letting him keep it was a deal I made with your father." Vincent lifted his teacup. His hand trembled slightly. "After the equity lawsuit, I dug up everything about Damien's background. Inai took the DNA report to your father and made him an offer. Inai would raise the boy and never reveal his true parentage to anyone. In exchange, your father would permanently place 15% of Apex's equity under my custodianship. And he agreed? He had no choice. Vincent let out a cold laugh. He was not afraid of me. He was afraid of your mother. If your mother had learned he had an illegitimate son, Apex would have been finished, and so would his marriage. And so he bought my silence with 15%. I sat there, a massive gear grinding through my thoughts. 3 years ago, when Damien entered Apex, why had Celeste trusted him so quickly? It was not just because he knew how to flatter her. It was because Damien was holding Vincent's cards, and Celeste needed those cards to execute her gutting plan. Does he know? I asked. Does Damien know who he is? He knows. Vincent's voice suddenly softened, carrying a weariness I could not quite name. He broke into my safe when he was 12 years old. He found the DNA report. He found his mother's suicide note. After that, he stopped speaking to me. He hated me. He hated your father. He hated the entire family line. He saved up all that hatred for over a decade, waiting to dump every last drop of it on you. He paused and looked directly into my eyes. He is not after money. What he wants is for your father's other son, that would be you, to pay for his mother's life. I stood up and walked to the window. Sycamore leaves were falling in the breeze, scattering across the flagstones one by one. Damien, in my half-brother. My father used an $80,000 paper trail to push his mother over the edge, then bought his silence with 15% of the company. He grew up in Vincent's household, but Vincent, at the end of the day, was just another man using him as leverage against my family. He had been alive for over 2 decades, and not a single person had ever truly asked him what he wanted. What he wanted was to burn everything my family had built to the ground. And in his eyes, I was the last fortress still standing. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Innie pulled it out. In Celeste. It was the 8th call tonight. Innie hit decline. You know why I came here today? I turned back to face Vincent. I am not here for your explanations. I am here for your position. What are you going to do? Vincent slowly pushed himself up from the chair and walked over to the wall of old photographs. He reached out and touched my father's face in one of the frames. His fingertips were gentle. The way you touch something you know is already broken. I owe Damien's mother an apology, he said, his voice so low I could barely hear it. When your father set her up, I knew beforehand. Innie argued with him, but I did not stop him. At the time, I thought, as long as we won that equity lawsuit, any price was worth paying. After she died, I understood. Some prices you cannot ever pay off. He turned around. The rims of his eyes were red, like coals that had burned down to embers. Damien wants to destroy you. Innie cannot stop him. But that 15% equity your father signed over, I have prepared the transfer documents. It all goes back to Apex. He walked to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and withdrew a file. Beyond that, I will pull Vivienne away from Damien. As for the rest, I have no standing to say anything. I looked at the file. Innie did not take it. Vincent, I said, earlier you told me my eyes do not carry calculation the way my father's did. I walked over, picked up the equity transfer document, and tucked it under my arm. That is because calculation cannot solve the problems I am dealing with. You can pull your daughter back. But Damien, I have to face him myself. I turned and walked toward the door. Vincent's voice came from behind me. Your brother, he has a gun. I stopped for half a beat, but did not look back. I know. The old photographs along the hallway flickered past in my peripheral vision. 2 young men standing shoulder to shoulder on a construction site, laughing without a care in the world. That was the early 90s. Apex had been a blank slate, and they had believed they would be brothers for life. Decades later, their sons stood on opposite sides of a war neither of them had started. Innie pushed open the front door. Outside, it had started to rain. Not a downpour yet, just a fine, cold drizzle that stung the skin like needles. My phone buzzed again. Not Celeste this time. Naomi. Mr. Julian, Damien just sent a message to your private email. He wants to meet you tonight at 10. The rooftop of Apex Tower. He said, come alone. What time is it now? 9:40. I hung up, pulled the car door open, and got in. As the engine turned over, Rain began to beat harder against the windshield, the sycamore leaves thrashing in the wind. Apex Tower was the first building my father ever designed himself. The beacon on its rooftop had once been the highest point of light in this city. Tonight, there was nothing up there but Rain and a brother who had been waiting over 2 decades for this moment. The tires rolled through standing water, spraying arcs into the dark. Time to meet you, Damien. Time to end this. Inai had been up to the rooftop of Apex Tower many times before. The first time was 8 years ago, right after my father died. Ini stood on this rooftop staring out at the city, and the only thought in my head was how to keep Apex from collapsing. After that, every time something major happened, I would come up here for a while, let the wind clear my head, let my thoughts settle. But tonight, the moment I pushed open the rooftop door, I knew this time was different. The rain was coming down hard, water gushed from the roof drains and hammered against the concrete. The city lights were smeared and blurred behind the curtain of rain, like looking through frosted glass. In there were no lights on the rooftop itself, only the neon signs of distant towers pulsing through the storm, washing everything in alternating flickers of red and blue. Damien stood near the edge, his back to me. He wore a black trench coat, his hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, his whole frame looking leaner than it had a few days ago. At his feet sat a black canvas bag. Inai walked toward him, umbrella in hand, my shoes splashing through the pooling water with every step. "You came alone?" Damien did not turn around. "Alone," I said, stopping about 5 paces behind him. He turned. In rain streamed down his face and dripped off his chin. His expression was calm, utterly different from the tremor of suppressed rage I had seen in the parking garage. The anger, the trembling, all of it was gone. What remained was an emptiness I did not have a name for. "Vincent told you everything?" he asked. "He told me." "Then you know why I called you up here." Damien bent down, unzipped the canvas bag and pulled something out. In metal glinted in the neon wash. In a gun, not a replica, not a prop, in a real factory-made pistol. Its steel wet with rain, gleaming cold. He placed the gun on the ground and stepped back. "Your father owes my mother a life," he said. His voice sounded distant in the rain. "Your father is dead. That debt falls to you, Julian. I'm giving you 2 choices." He pointed at the gun on the ground. "1. You pick it up and you shoot me. Inai disappear, and there is no one left trying to destroy everything you have. Apex is yours. Celestial is yours. You live however you want." He paused. Rain slid from the corner of his eye. It was impossible to tell if anything else was mixed in. 2. You turn around and walk away. But I swear to you, Damien swears to you, as long as there is breath in my body, I will take everything the family line has left. Apex. You. Your mother. Every last drop. Until there is nothing. The only sound on the rooftop was the rain. The neon signs flickered in the distance, painting Damien's face in shifting shades of light and shadow. Ine looked at the gun on the ground. The rain had soaked it, the metal shining with the reflected glow of the city's light pollution, like a black pearl dug out of the mud. It lay there, waiting for someone to pick it up. "You were 3 years old," I said. Damien's brow twitched. "After your mother died, Vincent took you in. You grew up in his house. When you were 12, you found the DNA report and learned where you came from. From that day on, you waited for this moment." I looked into his eyes. 20 years. You waited 20 years so you could put a gun on the ground in front of your half-brother and ask him to choose whether you die or he dies. Damien's jaw tightened. "Do you think this fixes anything?" I took a step forward. The edge of my umbrella blocked the rain from his face. "Does your mother come back? Does my father come back? Does that gun erase everything that happened over the last 3 decades? Do not lecture me." Damien's voice cracked open, something held down for too long finally snapping its restraints. "You do not get to do that. Julian, you grew up in the family home with a father and a mother and an inheritance and everyone circling around you like you were the center of the universe. And me? Inai lost my mother at 3 years old. Inai was raised by a man who shares not a single drop of blood with me. Ini did not even know what my real name was. You want to talk to me about the past? Do you actually think you have the right? His voice echoed across the empty rooftop, half swallowed by the rain, the rest bouncing off the concrete walls and coming back like the cry of something trapped. When your father went after Elaine, where were you? When your mother was living her comfortable life, where was I? Damien pointed at his own chest, rain streaming through his fingers. I was in a rented room on the edge of the city. Innie never even went to kindergarten. When Vincent took me in, I moved into a big house. I went to good schools, but every single night before I fell asleep, there was only one thing in my head: what my mother looked like when she died. His eyes were bloodshot, the rims burning red, but still no tears fell. So do not stand there and talk to me about the past. The word past, to me, is a bottle of pesticide. Or kancha Damien chemmola hinton shizen, raho wabasholita sant shola. I looked at Damien for a long moment. Then I closed my umbrella. The rain soaked through my hair and clothes instantly, cold enough to bite bone. Inai set the umbrella on the ground, walked forward, and crouched down 2 steps from Damien. Inai picked up the gun. Damien's body went rigid. Inai held the gun in my hand, testing its weight. Heavier than I expected. The metal was cold and slick in the rain, the grip beaded with water. Inai stood up and looked at Damien. You said my father owes your mother a life, I said. Then answer me one question. When my father used that $80,000 paper trail to force your mother into making false statements, did Vincent know? Damien's brow furrowed. You must have looked into what happened back then, I continued. Vincent told me himself. He knew beforehand. He argued with my father, but he did not stop him. Because at that point, Vincent was still on the same side as my father. He wanted your mother's testimony to win the equity lawsuit after she died. That was when Vincent turned on my father. Damien said nothing. You hate my family. That is fair. The sins my father committed, I do not deny them. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself whether Vincent raised you out of guilt, or because you were the last card he had to play against my family? Shut up! Damien said, his voice low. He raised you for 20 years and never told you the full truth. He let you grow up with half the hatred, thinking my family was your only enemy. Then he sent you into Apex, put you next to Celeste, and watched you turn your hatred into a scheme to hollow out an entire company. I stepped forward, reversed the gun in my hand, and extended it toward Damien. The barrel faced my own chest. The grip faced him. Damien, you told me to choose. But I am choosing a third path. Damien stared at the gun, then at me. I am not the only one you hate, I said. You hate everyone connected to my father's bloodline. But do you know there is still one person alive in that bloodline besides you and me? Damien's pupils contracted. My mother. Rain poured down my forehead, blurring my vision. But I did not blink. My mother still does not know her husband had a son outside his marriage. She does not know a woman named Elaine died behind that equity lawsuit. She knows nothing. All she knows is her husband was a successful businessman, her son took over the company, and she is supposed to live out her remaining years in peace. Damien's lips moved without sound. If you believe my family owes you a life, then you should meet her, not with a gun pointed at her. Just face her and tell her who you are, who your mother was, and how you survived. I pushed the gun closer. Then decide for yourself who really owes that debt. The rooftop fell silent for a long time. The rain kept falling harder now. The neon signs flickered in the distance, stretching our shadows long and then short, and then long again. The whole city lay beneath us in silence, like a giant beast lying prone. Damien reached out. I thought he was going to take the gun. He did not. He pushed my hand aside, stepped back, and leaned against the railing. Rain streamed down his face. His expression was no longer the flawless composure he had worn in the elevator, and it was no longer the explosive fury he had unleashed moments ago. It was something I had no words for, like a man who had been holding himself together for too long and had finally run out of strength. You are not like your father, he said, his voice so soft it nearly dissolved into the rain. What? Your father never would have pointed the gun at himself. He tilted his head back. Rain hammered against his face. His throat moved as he swallowed something down. Go, he said. I do not want to look at you right now. I did not move. Go. His voice suddenly cracked upward. Before I change my mind, I set the gun on the ground. The metal clanked softly against the concrete, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the rain. Innie turned, picked up my umbrella and walked toward the rooftop door. At the threshold, I glanced back. Damien leaned against the railing, head bowed, the rain erasing the edges of his silhouette. Innie pushed the door open and stepped into the stairwell. Water dripped from my clothes onto the concrete steps, leaving a trail of wet footprints behind me. My phone buzzed. Marcus. Mr. Julian word just came from Vincent's camp. He signed the equity transfer documents tonight. The full 15% is returning to Apex. Separately, Miss Celeste is in an unstable state at Mount Sinai Hospital. Arthur is still in the ICU. He has not regained consciousness. I understand. And one more thing. Your mother called earlier. She said she received a strange message from an unknown number. The sender claimed to be another son of your father. He asked to meet her. I stood in the stairwell, the umbrella still dripping in my hand. Damien, you moved faster than I did. But that is fine. Some things are harder to put down than a gun. Damien told me to go. I should have gone. Footsteps were already echoing up the stairwell. Marcus and his team coming up. But my feet felt bolted to the wet concrete of the rooftop, unable to take a single step. Because I saw someone. In the doorway of the rooftop access, in the shadows of the fire escape, stood Vincent. He wore a dark grey trench coat, the collar turned up high. Strands of his white hair were plastered to his forehead by the rain. He did not know how long he had been standing there or how much he had heard. His face was expressionless, but his old eyes carried something I had never seen before. Not guilt, not tension, something cold, calculated, composed, the way a man looks when he has been waiting a very long time for a chess game to reach the exact square he predicted. Damien followed my gaze and his body visibly locked up. Vincent? His voice held genuine confusion. What are you doing here? Vincent stepped out of the shadows. In his leather soles splashed through the standing water, each step slow, deliberate. His eyes swept over Damien, then landed on the gun resting on the ground, and finally came to rest on my face. I was worried, Vincent said. His voice was gravelly and calm. You too. One I raised. The other I watched come into this world. If I did not come tonight, neither of you would have been able to solve this equation on your own. Damien frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Vincent did not answer him. He looked at me. The expression was complex, the way an old hunter looks at two animals who have wandered into his trap. In no gloating, in no pity, just an almost professional detachment. Something clicked in my head. It had felt wrong from the moment I walked into his study. The way Vincent had talked too much, the way he had confessed too thoroughly. He had poured out Damien's history, the fake embezzlement scheme, the truth behind the equity transfer, all of it in one sitting, and had even volunteered to return the 15% to Apex. In a man who had spent 40 years navigating ruthless boardrooms, a man who had never bowed his head even when I drove him out of the company. Why would he suddenly become so cooperative? There was only one answer. Every word he had spoken had been scripted in advance. I bent down and picked up the gun. Damien whipped his head toward me, a flash of alarm in his eyes. But I did not stop. Innie gripped the gun, turned and aimed it at the rooftop door, at Vincent. Rain slid down the barrel and dripped onto the pooling water at my feet. The rooftop went quiet except for the rain. Julian, Damien's voice cracked open. Are you insane? I am not insane. I kept my eyes locked on Vincent's, my voice level. I just figured out a few things I should have understood much sooner. Vincent stood his ground, face still blank. He did not even glance at the weapon aimed at his chest. Let us hear them, he said. First thing, I spoke clearly, each word distinct. When my father framed Elaine with that $80,000 paper trail, you were not just someone who knew beforehand. You helped design the whole plan. Damien's breath stopped. The $80,000 transfer was executed using Apex's backup company seal. That seal was under dual custody. The finance department and the executive office. Elaine was just a junior accountant in finance. She could never have accessed that seal on her own. Only one person could, the finance director at the time. That was you. A muscle in Vincent's eyelid twitched. Second thing, after Elaine died, you took the DNA report to my father and used Damien's existence to extort 15% equity. But you never told Damien who ran that DNA test for you. It was my father's private doctor, who later became your private doctor. You planted a piece on my father's side of the board, and then you used that same piece to knock on my father's door from the other direction. I stepped forward, the gun barrel not wavering. Third thing, and this is the most important one. I stared into Vincent's eyes. Elaine did not commit suicide. It was as if someone had hit the mute button on the entire rooftop. Even the rain seemed to go silent for one stretched, suspended second. Damien's face went white in the neon flicker. "What did you say?" His voice trembled. His whole body trembled. "What did you just say?" "She did not take her own life," I repeated, my eyes never leaving Vincent. I pulled the old case file. The afternoon she drank the pesticide, she received 2 phone calls. The first was from my father, 4 minutes. The second was from a payphone, 11 minutes. That payphone was located in Sutton Place, where you lived at the time, Vincent. Vincent's face finally shifted. The change was subtle, a hairline crack spreading across a frozen lake, easy to miss, but I saw it. "Let me guess what you said on that call." My voice was cold as the wind ripping across the rooftop. "You told her that Dominic had already handed the evidence of embezzlement over to the authorities. You told her they were coming to arrest her in the morning. You told her that if she went to prison, her son would be ruined for life. You told her there was only one way to protect her child's future and her child's name." "You are constructing an interesting narrative," Vincent said, his voice still steady. She hung up the phone and drank a bottle of pesticide. I kept going, ignoring him. She died never knowing that the $80,000 paper trail was not enough to press charges. The authorities never received any case file. And she never knew that 3 days after she died, you walked into my father's office holding her son's DNA report. I turned to Damien. He was staring at Vincent. His lips were shaking. His entire frame looked like it had been hollowed out from the inside. "Vincent." His voice was so hoarse it was barely audible. "Is what he is saying true?" Vincent was silent. "Can you say it?" I stared at him, each word landing like a hammer strike. "Can you stand in front of your son and tell him the truth, that the person who pushed his mother to her death was not my father? It was you." Silence, in a long, suffocating silence. Then Vincent smiled. It was a very soft smile, almost lost beneath the sound of the rain. But there was no warmth in it. It was like opening the door to a walk-in freezer in the dead of winter, just cold air rushing out. "You are smarter than your father," Vincent said. His voice suddenly sounded lighter, as if he had set down a weight he had been carrying for too long. Dominic went to his grave without ever understanding any of this. He went to his grave believing he was the one who killed Elaine. Damien stumbled backward and hit the railing. His face was the color of paper. "Why?" Damien's voice scraped out of his throat. "Why did you do it?" Vincent looked at him. Something in his eyes finally shifted. It was a complicated expression, the look of a man confronting the consequences he himself had set in motion decades ago, an exhaustion beyond words. "Because I needed a reason," he said. "I needed a reason for you to hate Dominic's bloodline with every fiber of your being." Damien's pupils contracted violently. "When you were 3 years old, I brought you into my home. I watched you grow up. I knew you were intelligent. More intelligent than your father. More intelligent than Julian even. But intelligent people have one weakness. They ask questions. If you were just the abandoned, illegitimate son of a wealthy man, you would ask why. If your mother was just a woman Dominic drove to suicide, you would press for details. And the moment you traced it back to that payphone, you would stop hating Dominic's family." Vincent's voice was calm, measured, as if he were explaining a business case study that had nothing to do with him. "So you needed to hate? You had to hate. Only if you hated them enough would you willingly enter Apex, get close to Celeste, and sign that agreement. Only if you hated them enough would you refuse to let go even after Julian uncovered everything. You were my last card against the family, Damien. I could not afford for you to fold. So my mother's life was just one of your cards. Damien's voice shot up, jagged and raw, the sound of someone who had just been stabbed. She was my mother. She was your best friend's wife, in to get revenge on Dominic. You pushed her into the fire with your own hands. Vincent closed his eyes. And then Damien lunged. He moved so fast my eyes barely tracked it. He seized Vincent by the collar and slammed the old man against the metal doorframe with a sickening thud. "Look at me!" Damien's scream tore through the "Look at me and tell me, before my mother died." What did she say? Vincent grunted from the impact but did not fight back. He opened his eyes and looked at Damien. In there was something glistening in those old eyes. It could have been rain. It could have been something else. She said. Vincent's voice finally began to shake. She said to tell your mother she was sorry. She said she should never have been with your father. She said you were innocent. Damien's grip loosened. He stumbled back 2 steps. Then he turned and stared at the gun on the ground. Inai was still holding it, the barrel now lowered. "Give it to me," Damien said. His voice scraped raw. "No, give it to me." He lunged for the gun, his cry tearing through the storm. Inai sidestepped, moved the gun behind me to the drainage grate and pinned it under my foot. "You cannot have it right now," I said, gripping his shoulder. "If you take it now, he will have dragged you down with him for the rest of your life." Damien's shoulders heaved under my hand. Rain streamed down his face. His eyes were finally wet. Not the restrained tears of an adult, the tears of a child who lost his mother at 3 years old and had been saving them up for over 20 years. He sank down slowly, crouching on the wet concrete, his head in his hands. His shoulders shook, but no sound came out. Ine turned back to Vincent. "Vincent, that 15% equity you offered, I am not taking it," I said. "But there is one thing you are going to do. Tomorrow morning you are going to walk into the authorities and turn yourself in. Bring every document, every record, everything." Vincent leaned against the metal door, rain soaking through his coat. He did not speak. He simply nodded once, slowly. The only sound left on the rooftop was the rain. 3 months later, the Apex Group's succession gala was held in the 57th floor ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel, the same ballroom where Celeste had staged her anniversary celebration 3 months earlier. The same floor-to-ceiling windows, the same skyline. But the people seated around the main table tonight were different. When I walked into the ballroom with my mother on my arm, the entire room rose to its feet. My mother wore a navy blue dress, her silver hair pinned neatly back, and her spine was straight, but her fingers gripped my arm a little too tightly, the way someone steadies themselves before a long walk. 3 months ago, when I told her that her late husband had a son outside their marriage, she sat in the living room for an entire night without moving. The next morning she said one thing to me: "Bring him home. I want to meet him." Damien was here tonight. He sat at a table near the side of the room, wearing a dark grey suit. His hair cut shorter than before. He looked thinner than he had 3 months ago. He was not speaking to anyone, but he had not left either. When my mother walked in, his eyes followed her across the room, his fingers tightening around the stem of his wine glass until his knuckles went pale. Inai led my mother to her seat at the main table, then walked onto the stage. The room fell silent. More than 300 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Amepex executives, partner representatives, journalists, industry association figures. 3 months ago, Celeste had stood on this same stage while a withdrawal notice was slapped onto her celebration. Tonight, I stood here with no prepared remarks. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice carrying through the sound system. "This is not a victory celebration for Apex Group. And it is not a personal showcase. Tonight, Apex is here to formally disclose 3 things. In the audience, people straightened in their seats. Infophones came out, recording. First, ineffective immediately, I, Julian, with 51% absolute controlling interest, formally assume the role of sole controlling shareholder of Apex Group. The strategic direction of this company for the next 5 years will be set by me directly. No applause, but every pair of eyes in the room sharpened, because that sentence meant the power structure inside Apex had been completely gutted and rebuilt. Second, I continued without pause, After 3 months of internal investigation and full cooperation with the authorities, former Apex CEO Celeste now faces formal charges including embezzlement, illegal asset transfers, and money laundering. Apex will cooperate fully with the judicial process and will not accept any form of out-of-court settlement. The room finally reacted. Journalists in the back rows began taking photographs, the shutter sounds cascading over each other. A few of the old board members at the front tables exchanged glances, but no one spoke. They all understood by now. 51% of Celestial Holdings was already under my name. I lifted my head and swept my gaze across the main table. My mother sat there watching me, something unreadable in her expression. Damien remained at his side table, head lowered, fingertips tracing the rim of his glass. Third, I slowed my words deliberately. I have made a personal decision. INI will donate 40% of my shares in Celestial Holdings in their entirety to establish an anti-commercial fraud foundation. This foundation will provide dedicated support to small and medium business owners and ordinary investors who have suffered losses due to commercial fraud. The room erupted. 40% of Celestial Holdings. At current market valuation, that was over $4 billion. Donated. Every last share. Mr. Julian. A journalist stood up, shouting over the noise. What is your reason for this decision? I looked at the journalist and smiled. Because I came very close to being a victim of commercial fraud myself. I know what that feels like. You trust someone. You give them everything. And then you discover they were calculating against you from the very first day. That feeling is not about the money. It is about having your trust in the world hollowed out. INI do not want anyone else to go through that. The applause finally came. Scattered at first, a few individuals rising. Then entire tables stood clapping. The sound surged through the ballroom, but I was not looking at the people clapping. My eyes had found the corner of the room. Celeste sat alone at the farthest table. She wore a plain black dress, no makeup, her hair pulled back carelessly. 3 months had hollowed her out. Her cheekbones jutted sharply, and her eyes were dull, empty. In front of her sat a glass of red wine, untouched, and a document, in divorce papers. Inside, her father had survived, pulled back from the edge by the doctors at Mount Sinai. But Celestial was gone. Apex was gone. Damien was gone. She sat there by herself, an island with only its peak still above water. When I stepped off the stage, I passed her table. She looked up at me. There was no anger in her eyes, no pleading, just the hollow blankness of someone who has been scraped clean. Julian, she said. Her voice was as thin as a scrap of paper. Did you ever love me? I stopped. Yes, I said. For 3 years. She said nothing more. Neither did I. I turned and walked toward the main table. Beside the main table, a woman stood waiting for me. Vivienne. She wore a burgundy satin gown, the exact same shade as the dress Celeste had worn 3 months ago, but the cut was sharper, the posture more commanding. She held a glass of champagne, the corner of her mouth curved in a faint smile. Her eyes were sharp, alert, carrying a light that was impossible to ignore. 3 months ago, she had been the one who coordinated with Marcus to execute the full-scale takeover of Celestial's distributor network. She was Vincent's daughter, but she was also the de facto head of Meridian Capital, 8 years of experience navigating ruthless capital markets, her methods decisive and precise. She knew everything her father had done. She knew everything between Damien and me. 3 months ago, she had come to me on her own and said she wanted to work together. I asked her why. She said something I have never forgotten. My father owes your family a debt. I am here to repay it. But I do things differently than he did. INI do not hide in the shadows. INI stand in the light. You look stunning tonight, I said, extending my hand. You look quite sharp yourself. She switched her champagne glass to her left hand and slid her right into mine. Her palm was warm. You walk in holding your mother's arm, announce a $4 billion donation, leave your ex-wife sitting alone in the corner, and then take the hand of the woman who helped you burn her empire down. Julian, you wrote a merciless script. The final scene is not over yet, I said, and I led her onto the dance floor. The music started, the lights dimmed, the spotlight following us as we moved. Ine rested my hand on Vivienne's waist, in her arm draped over my shoulder, and we turned slowly with the music. "Your father did not come tonight?" I asked quietly. "He came." Vivienne tilted her head slightly toward the ballroom entrance, but he said he could not bring himself to walk inside. "He is sitting in the lobby, waiting to speak with you after the event. And the surrender. The documents have been filed. The lawyer says 3 years or less." Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened slightly on my shoulder. "He asked me to give you a message. He said what you did on the rooftop, stopping Damien from picking up that gun, was something your father spent his whole life never learning how to do." I said nothing. In beyond the edge of the dance floor, my mother was speaking with Damien. The two of them sat at a small table beside the main one. My mother's lips were moving. Damien listened with his head lowered, nodding occasionally. Ine could not quite read his expression, but his hands had finally released the wine glass. "Your brother seems willing to talk to your mother now," Vivienne said, following my gaze. "One step at a time," I said. 20 years of knots do not come undone over a single glass of wine." The music shifted, the tempo slowing further. Vivienne rested her head against my shoulder, the scent of her perfume and champagne drifting through the low light. Outside the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline glittered as it always had, the exact same view as 3 months ago. But the people standing on this side of the glass were no longer the same. Power does not change hands with fanfare. It changes hands in a handshake, a signed document, the seating arrangement at a gala. By the time anyone notices, the throne already belongs to someone else. In a new chapter begins tonight.